So this week, Springtrap from Five Nights at Freddy's was finally added as a new killer in Dead by Daylight, and it got me thinking about the character. In particular, it reminded me of the video by the YouTube animator Umwell, where he actually reanimated the entire Dragon Ball Super Broly fight of Gogeta vs. Broly, but replaced Goku, Vegeta, and Gogeta with Springtrap, Burntrap, and an endoskeleton, which showed the half-human, half-animatronic serial killer absolutely bullying the Saiyan for 2 minutes straight. This got me thinking, what would actually happen if Springtrap fought Broly? Is there any conceivable way for him to defeat the Saiyan, or is this just a spite matchup? Well, it turns out not only is this fight far closer than you may think, but that animation may be way more accurate than you could possibly believe. Don't believe me? Well, let's jump right in and find out. If you like this kind of stuff, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's jump right in. As he's the Dragon Ball character and pretty much has everything to lose here, let's go over the power scaling of Broly first. Starting with content entirely within the movie, Broly starts off being totally unable to transform and is not able to tap into his true power. After only fighting briefly, he grows in power and begins to master his strength, eventually becoming strong enough to not only surpass base form Vegeta, but eventually force him to use Super Saiyan God. Initially, this becomes the hard limit for the Saiyan, as he's unable to hang with Vegeta in his Super Saiyan God state, until he transforms into his own Ikari transformation, which gives him the 10 times strength multiplier of the Grade 8 form with none of the drawbacks of lower speed and larger size. He goes on to thrash Vegeta until Goku tags in. Despite seeming to perform a little bit better, Broly seems to quickly adapt and grow even stronger, eventually forcing Goku into Super Saiyan Blue. From here, the fight essentially becomes even, with Guide saying the same thing, with Ikari Broly essentially being blue level all by himself. Of course though, Broly would then unlock Super Saiyan after Frieza kills his father Paragus. At the absolute bare minimum, this would be another 50 times strength multiplier on top of his previous level, making it so even Goku and Vegeta teaming up in Super Saiyan Blue would still be 25 times weaker than Broly's current power. Of course, this leaves them with no other choice but fusion. Now, unlike the Potara fusion, the multiplier for the fusion dance itself is far less specified. However, if you want to, you can just use this guide that says Gogeta and Vegito are equally matched trump cards to say that fusion has a similar A times B multiplier as Potara. Now, regardless, Gogeta pretty much slams Broly throughout the fight. Broly's continued growth initially does force base Gogeta to use Mastered Super Saiyan, meaning that, again, Broly grew massively stronger while beating up on Frieza for an hour. Beyond this, Broly would then unlock a totally unique form, that being Full Power Super Saiyan, not to be confused with the original Full Power Super Saiyan. This form once again forces Gogeta to use blue, and from there, Broly never lands another hit and gets smacked down by the fusion until finally getting saved by a wish from Shenron. At the end of the movie, Goku notes that Broly might be stronger than Beerus, and that's pretty much all we get from the film itself. Broly might be stronger than Beerus, and is more than a fusion multiplier beyond Goku and Vegeta. Since the movie, he hasn't done all that much. He trained a little bit during Dragon Ball Super Superhero, and in the manga continuity, he did actually master his Super Saiyan state and could kind of hold his own against Beast Gohan. Besides that though, that's all we really get. However, supplemental material paints a brand new picture for Broly. I've talked about this time and time again, but pretty much every source that's ever talked about Broly has called him the strongest enemy ever. Broly is a new level of power, the greatest enemy, history's strongest enemy, the strongest Saiyan, and literally even the strongest in the series. Not to make this video a Broly versus Jiren debate, but Broly beats that guy, and obviously anyone else Goku and Vegeta have fought up to that point. Even in the next movie, the main enemy Cell Max isn't even stronger than Broly as per Toriyama's statement. Therefore, Broly scales over pretty much every feat in Dragon Ball and Super up to that point, and even without guides would be on the level of Gods of Destruction or beyond, putting him above Beerus's Universe 7 punch clash with Goku, even if for some reason you think Beerus was doing all the heavy lifting during that scene. Now, depending on what you think of the Dragon Ball cosmology, this can be either a 4D low multiversal feat or 5D low complex multiversal feat. I don't really care which. While there is technically an infinite difference between these, it's ultimately actually not gonna matter for the final result. Either way, Broly scales massively above this as he clears multiple arcs and multipliers of strength beyond this. Fortunately, besides raw power, Broly doesn't really have much else to offer, as he's one of the least experienced or skilled fighters in all of Dragon Ball. Still, overall, at this point, the only mortal character who surpasses Broly in the anime is like Beast Gohan, but can an immortal like Springtrap get a win? Let's find out. Now, William Afton, aka Springtrap, has nearly as many different forms and versions as Goku has Super Saiyan transformations. For the most part, the verse, including Springtrap himself, is consistently wall level, from animatronics punching directly through metal air vents, or easily crushing entire human bodies with ease. Afton, even after getting stronger by being spring-locked, was able to easily dismantle these animatronics with low difficulty. And unfortunately, that's pretty much where the scaling of Five Nights at Freddy's ends. There are a handful of other weird arguments you can make for things like the Five Nights at Freddy's novels or the FNAF World game, but I think the scaling arguments made from those are shaky at best and super inconsistent, and probably wouldn't get Springtrap strong enough to beat Broly anyways. So is that it? Springtrap ends up on the level of Hercule or even weaker than Chapter 1 Kid Goku? So of course Broly slams, right? Well, now due to Dead by Daylight, Springtrap has brand new scaling that he didn't have access to before. You see, Dead by Daylight is like the Super Smash Bros. Of horror franchises, bringing together monsters and killers from all over horror media. Within the gameplay and lore, all of these killers are pretty much treated as the same, and there's no reason for them to be made weaker by the enigmatic entity that created the death games. In other words, the Dead by Daylight version of Springtrap gets massively upscaled past his wall-level previous limitations. In particular, there are two massive powerhouses that have recently been added to the game. Before then, Afton would be like planetary at best from killers like Pinhead or Freddy Krueger in The Dream, but now both Dracula from Castlevania and Vecna from Dungeons & Dragons are in Dead by Daylight and are stronger than anything the franchise has seen before. Dracula is likely multiversal on his own, as he's stronger than characters like the Time Reaper, who are capable of wiping out multiple timelines within the verse at once, which include multiple alternate worlds and dimensions within them, potentially numbering in literally the millions. But we can even go further with Vecna. Now, I didn't know the lore of Dungeons & Dragons before researching this video, but it actually has a massive complex cosmology with an almost infinite hierarchy of gods and deities. Most importantly, Vecna is essentially the main enemy of a being known as the Lady of Pain. While she is ultimately stronger than him, she cannot fully defeat him with ease. This is impressive because she's able to warp and affect the entire infinite multiverse of infinite-sized universes of the D&D cosmology, a cosmology that has at least 5th dimensional realms, at least in this tier, as there are arguably realms within the cosmology that are beyond dimensions entirely. Regardless, Vecna is then at least 5D, aka Multiverse Plus, or low complex multiversal level in power, all while still ultimately being a lesser god in the D&D verse. Via the nature of the Dead by Daylight crossover, as the survivors are equally able to be caught or escape from any killer, Springtrap should be on the level of both of them, making the man behind the slaughter unironically a multiverse buster. So who wins this then? Now, of course, sticking both to their original material of no guides Broly and no crossover Afton, it's the biggest stomp imaginable, like literally putting Hercule up against Beerus. Broly's aura from a mile away would probably do the job. The same can't be said for crossover Springtrap though, whose scaling would actually fall right in the same low multi to low complex multi-power of Broly's scaling. At that point, it becomes an argument over abilities, honestly. Now, while Broly has Flay and Ki Blast and all that, Afton has the added perks of his essential immortality. Even if Broly manages to win against his opponent of essential equal strength, what happens when he always comes back? It seems that ultimately, that animation was actually more accurate than we initially thought. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. As always, thank you to my members, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya!